Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the Indian nationalist Brahmin, that's the upper social caste, media, because their hysterical chutzpah and super selective cherry picking reporting is enough to drive you crazy. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. But they're positioning themselves as being the morally and spiritually superior ones, but yet at the same time victims. This is something that Indians do rather well, actually, but and I'll come back to that in a minute. But the basis of their complaint is that white people, all white countries, particularly Britain, is being racist and bigoted and xenophobic against Indians. How they arrive at that, I don't know, given the millions of Indians that stream into Britain and elsewhere around the West, and how they're being gifted tens of thousands of jobs in the Australian public service, and just on it goes. The affirmative action programs to give Indians primacy is off the charts, and yet somehow it's the white people who are racist. Indians that have been living for 4, 5, 6 generations in the West to still send back to the country of their birth or the country of their genetic origin for husbands and brides, and refuse to integrate or assimilate, and that's ignored. But let's go through the point by point. Now, the first argument that the Indians or the Indian media, and again it's the nationalist media, put forward is that India was a rich country when Whitey showed up. So we're talking, early, sort of late 1600s, early 1700s when Whitey turned up. Now, initially, the white folks just had trading posts on the coastal ports. I can't see that would have had any effect on anything. This is before the French, and then the British started to take a bigger role in Indian affairs. But the claim is that India was a rich country, an advanced economy, technically advanced, philosophically and socially and spiritually advanced in every way. It was a fucking paradise, for goodness sakes. And then Dan Whitey showed up and stole everything. Now, this is the tiny, and it is tiny, kernel of truth that are used here. Is this is in the pre-industrial age, very different word, pre-industrial. And therefore, any area of the world that had a large population, and bear in mind, India wasn't a nation at the time, so we'd have to have an aggregation of all the various independent states and so on that made up the wider or the greater subcontinent. But the idea of the measuring economics at the time was largely an exercise in measuring populations. So India had, depending on whose numbers you look at, by the way, anywhere between 22 and 25% of world manufacturing output. So China also, China and India were populous nations back then, still are today, of course, but China had the biggest population, and they had, again, depending on whose numbers you look at, between 30 and 33% of world manufacturing output. So wow, they must have been really productive places. Holy guacamole. No, they were just large populations, and Europe had a very small population by contrast. The entire population of Europe was only 1/5, population-wise, was 1/5 of the population of India. So the entire population of Europe, that doesn't include Russia, by the way, the entire population of Europe was 1/5 that of India, and again, smaller again when compared to the population of China. So the population of Europe was very small compared to India and China, and so the size of the economies in the pre-industrial age would reflect these differences in populations. But even then, and this is something the Indians don't talk about, the European worker and the European economies were far more productive than the Indian and Chinese economies. Why was this so? Again, this is the pre-industrial age. So why, with a population 1/5 that of India, why was Europe equal in manufacturing output or economic output. So India and Europe have the same manufacturing output at this time. This is the period 1720 to 1750. So they have the same output, yet the population of Europe is one fifth. So Europe is, or the European worker, the European economies are 5 times more productive than the economies of India. Now, why is that difference there, even in the 1720s? Well, already it was technological. The British had, or the Europeans, I mean, beginning with the Portuguese and so on, but the Europeans had developed long ocean-going vessels, and then had developed the technology for cargo vessels, so ships that could carry, a decent amount of cargo for trading and things like trade spices, that sort of stuff. So the Europeans had developed various technologies in firearms and cannons and metallurgy and metallurgy in particular. So even things like navigation instruments, the sextant and so on. Europe had the Europeans, the white Europeans were much more advanced technologically and organizationally. So this is and economically, the trading, the sophistication of the European traders was vastly ahead of anything that the Indians or the Chinese were doing at the time. Now, so already Europe was technically, organizationally, economically far superior to India, even in the period 1720 to 1750. Now let's come back to their claim that India was vastly superior to Europe. Let's suppose that's so. Then why is it a very small number, just a few thousand Europeans in their ships were able to so successfully penetrate not only economically but later on geographically and eventually take over India? Why was that so? How was it so? How were they able to do it? India, according to these nationalists, was the most advanced, technical, social, economic paradise in the world. Rich country that was being evilly raped by those fascist white people. Now this is not so. So we can shoot that out the water straight away. India, when the whites showed up, was an utter basket case. It was getting a lot of heavy pressure from the Islamic, what today would be the sort of the Afghani hordes, if you like. The Islamic forces from the north, getting a lot of trouble there. The place was in a state of almost permanent civil war with states, the various states and regions and principalities all fighting each other and all jockeying for position, all trying to rip each other off, and this, which they do today, by the way. You look at all the, nearly all the, in fact, pretty much all the labour rip-off scam labour hire organisations operating around the world, duping Indians into coming to the West. They're all run by other Indians. The Indians ripping each other off, and the caste system means that if you're a Brahmin and you steal from the peasant, then you've committed no crime at all. You're just doing what's accepted for your high social status. So anyway, but as the Industrial Revolution kicked off, then the productivity of the Europeans, particularly the British, given that's where the Industrial Revolution kicked off, the productivity of the Europeans increased. So by the early 1800s, the British manufacturing output was already surpassing the output of India, or what would later be the nation. Again, India didn't exist as a nation at the time, and it's very disingenuous of the Indian media to pretend it did, because it didn't. But so now that at its high point, the productivity of this is the relative high point in the Industrial Revolution, the British were outproducing, this is per capita, outproducing the Indian worker by 50 plus to 1. So the British factories could produce 50 widgets per worker to the Indians 1. Now, because India had such a huge population, there was a very deep-seated resistance to industrialization. and the British almost gave up. That almost wasn't worth trying, because of this deep-seated resistance, because it would have meant mass unemployment, the artisan class that made handmade the tables and the chairs and whatever, the manufactured goods, they would have been out of work. The cloth weavers and all sorts of things like that. So this is something that the Indian nationalist media skirt over about the wealth of India, or the supposed wealth. That India's wealth didn't decline. Far from it. It's the rest of the world advanced at a much faster rate due to industrialization, which meant that India's wealth that had been tied largely to just its massive population, even though it was far less productive than Europe, even in the pre-industrial age, they slipped further behind. So on a relative basis, they went from 23%, give or take, 23% of world manufacturing output down to 2% of world manufacturing output. But in fact, they were producing more. It's just on a relative basis that the Western world industrialized very quickly and very intensively, embracing the scientific method, while India was stuck in sort of medieval or even Stone Age attitudes in the rural areas, and that meant they fell behind. So even though their output was greater in the 1800s than it was in for example, the early 1700s, on a relative basis, the Western European powers all rapidly surpassed India and other countries too, like China. So that was the difference. So when they say India was a rich country, you had 23%, and then it was 2%. It was all stolen by evil Whitey. And whenever they do that crap, it's bullshit, utter total bullshit, and you can dismiss it out of hand. Now, coming to the claim that Indian media, or India rather, is depicted negatively in Western media. Well, there are negative stories. I certainly see that. Now, the argument that they put forward is that anything that's negative to India or makes India look bad, for example, the peasant population, the large, the low GDP per capita, the religious unrest and riots, the many people that are killed in these riots, and the fact that there's over 3,000 applicants for a job in the public service, and each job, that should all be said. No, don't talk about that. Talk about how the upper class Brahmins live. Talk about how the rich people live, and how we go to restaurants and cafes, and how we live a rich life, and how we live a life of where we don't have to work. We just parasite off the peasants, and that's what you should report. The beautiful people, the rich people, and we lead a very international, cosmopolitan life. And look how our rich people are buying up worthless European assets and this sort of thing, just for the bragging rights. That's what you should report. Don't report the negative things. Now, they also do a lot of cherry picking. For example, there's an Indian that was in England that was going around bribing various students at a university so that they could become president of the student council, or student union, or student newspaper, whatever it was. And this bribery was discovered, and so they were not allowed to stand for election because of because of the bribery. And so the Indian media, though, reports that there you go, racism, there it is, fucking racism. Look, the superior Indian candidate, very, very, very superior to all those pathetic white people, wasn't allowed to stand because the white people couldn't compete with the Indian moral superiority. Nah, it wasn't that. Just a plain case of bribery and corruption, if you don't mind. or Indian, Indians that have scam front labour hire organisations and engaging again in all sorts of bribery and corruption and forgery. Hey, that's not bribery and forgery. That's just racism. So it is because the white people are jealous of our success, because we are so superior. So no, it's not because of that. So now the West has bent over backwards, triple fold, to give Indians great jobs, prestigious jobs, jobs they haven't earned and don't deserve, and haven't achieved anything worthwhile to merit those jobs, and whether it be the head of IT firms or social media firms. I mean, look at the guy they installed as head of Twitter. I mean, fuck. You wouldn't employ that guy to sweep the floor, for goodness sakes, and there he is, being paid gazillions, and you couldn't imagine a more unimpressive person. But anyway, the whole thing is in Australia, at least, Indians are being gifted through affirmative action and quotas, gifted jobs in the public service that they haven't earned and wouldn't get under any other circumstances. Before affirmative action and quotas came in, the initial tranche of Indians coming to Australia had a lot of trouble getting jobs. They didn't really have the qualifications. All their degrees were as a result of bribery and corruption. The work experience they claimed they had, they didn't have. And they were quite sort of casual about deceiving the white Western people. Well, why not? What's wrong? We do this in India. Bribery and corruption, baksheesh, and everything. That's how life is. What's your problem? Why can't we do it here? We're the morally superior and culturally superior ones, and they have this attitude. But unfortunately, Indians want to come to the West. They want to. There's hundreds of millions of Indians that want to get the fuck out of India and come to the West, whether it's Brahmins for bragging rights or people who aren't so well socially positioned for economic and other reasons. But nonetheless, hundreds of millions of Indians want to get the fuck out of India and come to the West. The white, evil, wicked, racist, bigoted, xenophobic West. But it boils down to not racism as it is racism. No. When you listen to the whole story that they put forward, is that as the Brahmin class of the Indian nationalist group, and they're distinct from others, is that what we want is respect. We want respect, and it's that they think they're not getting. And they're very, very sensitive about the respect, or the respect that they think they're not getting. But they are absolutely, in their view at least, absolutely entitled to what they, premium levels respect. And if they don't get it, then as far as they're concerned, or they pretend to be, to assume that it's racist. But nothing in their argument or the media, as the Angus is the reportage, the reportage. Nothing in the media, Western media coverage and supposed attitude. There have been some alleged surveys that said 95% of Indians say they have been a victim of racism. Well, I don't know who did the survey or what the questions were, or so. How do you define this racism? Millions upon millions of Indians are streaming, gagging to get to England and the West. Why would they do that if the place is so evil and racist and so against them? Now there's a claim that Indians do better than white people, and therefore white people are just jealous of the Indian brilliance. I don't know. Indian kids that were at school, in the first tranche of Indians coming to Australia didn't do any good. They were in the bottom classes, not the top classes. But suddenly, as soon as affirmative action in education is installed, suddenly Indians are all magically just suddenly in the top classes. I don't know. How does that happen? Just a flick of a switch, they suddenly go from the bottom classes to the top. And someone's telling me that's because they're all intellectually brilliant. And if indeed Indians are so brilliant, and let's say for the moment they are, why is India such a dirt poor basket case? But yet the Indian media reports that India is now an intellectual leader in the world. How they arrive at that is quite beyond me, but that's the claim. But again, it comes back to this base thing. We are the upper caste Indians, and we want, as they did when the British arrived. They've never forgiven the British, by the way, because at the apex of Indian society were these Brahmins, and they were supplanted from their top position in the social hierarchy by the British, and they've never forgiven the British for that. Now the reverse is the Indians say that this Indian nationalist media outfit. It's almost funny the nonsense they come out with. They insist that the British are jealous about how successful India's been. It's this huge beacon now of something or other that's supposed to be, again, demanding, entitled to this respect. I don't know how they can say that, but they do. And therefore, the whole issue is around we now are to be respected. You are required to respect us. If you don't, we'll accuse you of all sorts of things, racism, bigotry, and the like. But they want the lifestyle of the Brahmins, the rich Brahmins of India, to actually be the poster child of Indian life. They don't want the hundreds of millions of desperately dirt poor subsistence peasants to be the focus. They want the other side of it. Yet they're quite happy to focus on the darker side of say, white civilization and say, well, look, they're inferior to us. Look at that. So they want to have it both ways, but that's all propagandists want to have it both ways. That's the only way their propaganda can get across the line. You've been a Tassos today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.